Okay, hello Visioneers. Yesterday in class we were having trouble figuring out how to do an overlay from a scene to an image or video in the background. That is, bring an object in. And this would be the object here and scene here. I'm going to always change this to scene objects. So ignore that and we'll make a new scene called scene video. And now I keep them separate. See, they're here, there's scene objects, and there's scene video. Scene video is blank because we go up to scripting, past it to video editing, go to video editing, and we get a timeline. Now if we go back to scene objects, we still have the same video editing timeline. So you have to get familiar with the fact that you're looking up here to know whether you're in scene objects or scene video. When you're in video, this is what you want. And when you're in scene objects, you need to go back over to layout. That's what you want. Video editing is now there as a tab, but you want to be in layout. When you go to the video, you need to go back to video editing. So here in video editing, I'm going to add an image, and I'll go into my downloads folder, my Nexus comic, for example, and I can find maybe, yeah, I'll take this one of Thriving, and I'll add that. So there's an image, and I want to put an object like an orb, like Entharp, floating around on here. So now I go back to my layout, and again, got to go back to my scene objects. Okay. There's a cube. I'm going to hit X to get rid of the cube. And I'm going to add a mesh, and it's going to be an icosphere. So that's the object. And a couple things you can do with that. If you're in materials, you can go down to the materials tab here, add a new material, and let's give it a greenish blue glow, like that. Let's make it metallic, kind of cool. And let's also give it a emission, so it's kind of glowing. Not too much, but a little bit. And the color that glows should be sort of bluish color. So now we have a glowing kind of thing happening here. All right, so that's going to be the Entharp globe, and we want that to appear over the video. So let's go to video editing, and we're going to add now a scene. And the scene, the only one available, because we're in the video scene, is the object scene. And we put that there, and of course it doesn't show up. That's the problem we saw yesterday. So a couple things that we have to do. First thing we have to do is go up here to the render properties and go down to film and turn on transparent. That's step one. The next thing we need to do is to go to the output and make sure that it is PNG, which it is, and that it's RGBA, which has got an alpha channel. An alpha channel is the one that becomes transparent. So those two things have to be set up, and usually they are by default. The PNG is selected with the alpha channel, but the film transparent is usually not. So save this now. And so always do a save. So we'll call this Entharp object float. Something like that. Right, so you say that. Then notice here, when we click on the object itself, it has alpha over under compositing and opacity. If I remove the opacity, obviously it disappears, but so does the background disappears, but so does the foreground object. So that is more. If I use alpha under, it appears as well. It's supposed to be alpha over, and it's supposed to work, but we see nothing. Let's go over to render and render the image of that frame. You'll see it still has the background. So there's got to be some refreshing that we're doing to make this work. Let me go back over to the objects and to the layout. And here, let's also make sure that in this scene, we have done the same thing, that we've gone over to film and set it to transparent, because this is what needs to be transparent. So you've got to make sure you're doing it. There's two scenes, and so we set that to transparent. We go back to our video scene, and bingo, it starts to work. Now, sometimes it takes a few seconds to get the rendering going, and I really don't know why that particular part isn't working, but it does working when you render it. So sometimes you'll get a little bit of jitter. Now it's all working, right? And then it's floating there. Now you'll notice that you don't get the color when you're in preview mode for some reason, but you do get the color when you render it here. So now that you have that there, you can come in here and hit S to scale, and so you can move it over if you want to. This is not really the place to do the animation because there aren't any keyframes here. So if you wanted the ball to move, then what you would do is go back to your object scene layout and see what your camera is seeing. That's the object. And if you want it to move, you should bring it over to, say, one side, and then hit I, the letter I, keyframe. You put this up. There's that little dot down there that shows the keyframe. And say 2 seconds, 30 frames a second. You'll then want to move it over and hit I again, and it puts a dot in there. So it's going to move like that. That means that when we now save this, when we now go to your video scene, go back to video editing, you'll see that it moves like that. So as we play it, off it goes, and then it stops because we did that little animation. And again, wherever you render, you're going to get the color there. And if you render just this part here, you would get that over there. If you wanted to render the whole animation, then you would come in here and you would render the animation, and then you'd see it frame by frame beginning to move in there as it renders what's going on there. Boom, boom, boom. So you get that animation. That makes your movie, right? So now you have an idea of how you can animate and move those animations in here. It's not that you can't. If you go to transform here, it's not that you can't move it around in here in terms of positions. So watch this. If I bring it down to here and I go to set a keyframe by pressing on a dot, it's not going to help to put the I in because there's no timeline to put that in. But if I come over here and I said, okay, the position of X and Y, I'm going to create a keyframe there, and then over here I'll move it to there, and see this turned orange now. So I'm going to create a keyframe there, and yes, it is going to move. So you can do animations there as well. So there's a lot of different variables there. Maybe sometimes that's the best way to do the animation unless it's a more complicated animation instead of freeframes. And you can see as I go back and forth, you can see over down here the positions changing. And so if you wanted it then to suddenly move up, you can move it up here and then set that as a keyframe. And then when you play it, it goes down here and then moves up. So a lot of flexibility in this, and I really love it if you start experimenting with that. I'm going to pause for a second and just see if there's an answer to, is there a way to get this thing to show up in color? Because if I do color and alpha here, nothing happens. If I do RGB, so there's no, doesn't seem to be a way to make the color show up in here. I'm going to go check that out for a minute and I'll be right back. Pause. Okay, well, according to ChatGPT, there's no way to do it. So when you're in this, you're always in the preview going to see the object in grayscale until you render it. So you render the image and then you see it. They did suggest that one way that you could do it is you could go to the object scene and we could render that out. So I have this little animation, right? So you could render that, and really you don't need to, because we don't necessarily want to render out that animation. We could just place it here and render the image. And now it's over transparency, as you can see from this. So when I save this image and call it icosphere, then when I go here and go to my scene video there, I can get rid of this completely, and I can bring in that image. And so there it is, and it's already got a grayscale on it. So boom, that's in there, and then I can just drag it like this, and again I can scale it and move it, and then put my put my position keyframes X and Y, and then move it wherever I want to, and hit G, move it over there. This turns orange, click those, and that's going to do that. And then when I get up here, I can make it suddenly zoom up to the top. And then when I play my animation, it starts to move, and it goes up. So that's one way to do it. And you could have rendered this as a movie as well. So maybe it has arms and legs. I mean, for Ella's elephant, it might be the elephant walking, but then you can move. So you do a walk cycle in place, and then you move the elephant using this. So there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, but this is an effective way. Just understand that if you're actually bringing the scene in, right, then it's going to come in. This is the one that animates. It's going to come in as a grayscale until, let me sort this, bring this down. Right. So it's going to come in as a grayscale until you actually render it, and then boom, you have that one there and that one there, and you can do the whole film that way. But when you're here, because I rendered that one frame, it does show up, but as soon as I go there, it turns gray again. Right? So once you've done a render, then you're going to begin to get you're going to begin to get those colors in. So here we have shape going, and then pinks, pink, 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 pink. And I wonder what happens if we render here, right? And you see that it's there, but then I go back, we've lost it from the other frames. It's only that one frame at a time that stays in memory. So that's just something you have to be aware of, those different techniques. But I want you all to get familiar with bringing scenes in. And you can then have a lot of fun going back in and adding different objects. So for example, if I took a UFO. Let's say we put a UFO. We've got UFO there, and let me filter this with 3 first. Alright, so that's a locked one. It's the only real one that's here is given available to, let's say, a fantasy cloud or an alien incubator vat. Alright, that's locked. They're all locked. Okay, so the only UFO thing we have, maybe I'll put in space. First, yeah. Okay, alright, we have a rocket ship. That's good. Well, there's a UFO. Right, so let's go with that UFO there, and there it is. So now that's in that same object, see? And we know that our little object crosses it. It too can, this part here to move it. We can set a keyframe here for this. Let me move it again. Okay, let's have this here and hit I for keyframe. And then as that moves, this guy needs to move out of the way. So set a keyframe there, and then this moves, and then he goes out of the way again. And set a keyframe, and then this guy moves to there, and he jumps up to here to get out of the way. Set a keyframe. So we have this animation where it's sort of chasing it. Now because, right, when we get back to our, let's see this. When we get back to our video scene, video editing, then you can see that in that grayscale, there it is. This can still be moved down there, and you have that going on. Right, that's the animation we just did. When you render, of course, it's going to render. There's the UFO. But if you wanted it to be able to be manipulated in there, we could go to the scene, and now we could render that whole animation. We don't need everything here. Let's just do it right up to the end of there. There's the scene start and the scene end, 47 frames. It shouldn't take too long. So we'd render the animation and let it do its thing. I'll put you on pause here so you don't have to watch this painfully render. Okay, so it's finished rendering, and now when I come to it, that render was done as a series. If you look at the output, a series of PNGs in the temp folder. So we didn't set a specified output for that. So if we want to go to the temp folder and find where that temp folder is, so let me see. It's not. Oh, maybe there's this. Let's see. No, this is. Yeah, these are frames that were rendered out that I don't need actually. Let's get rid of those. Okay. What we want is to find where the temp folder is in this. And I should have specified that the temp folder can be opened here. There they are, ctemp. And what you can do is then take all those frames, and they start all the way from 0, 0, 0 all the way up to 47. You can drag those frames into the video editor. So we'll go back to video editing, and we'll drag them. Oh, it doesn't let us drag them. Well, that's a shame. So I guess what we have to do then is go to ctemp, and we go to add, and go to image sequence. We can go to temp, and it's the wrong temp. Then we need ctemp. So let's find it. Really should have put it in a different folder. No items. Maybe no items. I know that it was there. We know that it was there. We know that it was under ctemp. So I need to find it. Come on. Come on, come on. C temp. Ah, it's the other temp. Oops, spelled it wrong. C temp. There we go. Right, so all these images here, we're going to drag. We're going to drag them in here. Right? That's the animation. And of course they're big, so I'll scale it down with S. And then I can move it wherever I want to move it. Now these gray ones we don't need anymore because we rendered out a sequence of images. And so those sequences have the alpha channel. And that's where we can put it. And we can really move it wherever we want to. So what you're seeing is the ability to, and this is going to go longer, the ability to just bring animations in that have their alpha channel. Okay, and you have that control. And then this, of course, can be moved as well, because if you have an animation like this going across and up, you could also say of this box, this frame that you want to set position X and Y, then as you move it up, you want to bring it down to this corner and set those keyframes. And then what you get is this. So that's the basic technique, and you need to play around with that, knowing that the camera's looking down through here, and you can turn these things on and off. On and off. Right. And just to recap then, the way that this is done is it starts out with a scene that you're going to do objects in. It always starts with layout and a scene. You should call that scene objects, right? And you must go through here into the output render and go down to film and make sure you've turned on transparent. Because if transparent is not put on, as we'll go back and show you when we go to the video editing scene, then when we bring in a scene, these are renders, so let's turn that off. Let's turn that off. Right. When you go and you add the scene, the object scene in, it's going to show up with gray in the background. So you have to then go back to the object scene, go into the output, and make sure the render that it's set to transparent. You don't have to go back to layout if you happen to stay in video editing. It doesn't matter. Go back to your video editing scene, and now it shows the transparency. Sometimes it takes a few seconds for it to start rendering and starts blinking. That's how it works. And then you can play around with that stuff. And once again, as I said, you won't see the color until you hit render image or render animation, and then you'll see the colors. And so it's absolutely critical that you know that you're just going to get grayscale in the sequencer window, but the colors are there. You can always check them and see. Right? But if you render it and then bring it in as a sequence, then you're going to get that. Right? I hope that helps. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions, and I can answer them. But your task is to find a way to create some objects, bring some objects in, put them in on top of video or on top of still images as you do video editing. I hope that helps.